Hey guys, this is John, and I'm playing Molson123Abc in a 15 plus 10 game on chess.com. All right, so new site, I'm mixing it up a little bit. The ICC 15-minute pool has been really dead in recent months. So I've decided to play a couple different sites, so chess.com, Lee Chess, in hopes of getting better opposition. But you notice that my standard rating on chess.com is not as high as I would like it to be. That's mostly because I've been taking beatings at the hands of Computer Impossible when I have played standard games. So that's why I'm rated 1842. So here against Molson, I am playing b6 on move 1. This is an occasional weapon I use. This is a game with increment. I don't think you guys have seen me play standard with increment before. So we should get a game based purely on a chess result rather than a time situation. I think that's what everyone wants, right? Unless you're one of those bullet flaggers, as I can sometimes be. So with b6, I'm initiating a queenside fianchetto. If white establishes a pawn on e4, that will be especially helpful because I can put my bishop on b7 and fire away at that pawn. Okay, knight c3. Let's just put the bishop on its rightful diagonal. And white does play e4. All right, so here, probably I'll play e6 just to enable bishop b4, attacking that white knight on c3. It also may be possible to play e5 and try to take over the center, although I don't know if e5 is what I'd like to do because I do give up some control of d5 that way. So I think I'd rather play the position with e6. Usually e6 just fits in better with b6 and bishop b7. So we'll see if white allows us to play bishop b4 if they want to play something prophylactic like a3, stopping my bishop from coming out. And there you go, white does play a3, so they know what I'm up to. Maybe now we can transform the game into some sort of hedgehog position, though. So I'll play c5, trying to clamp down on the d4 square. And very possible that white will play knight f3 and then d4, and we'll take this baby into a hedgehog, which I'm familiar with from the black side, so I wouldn't mind. In a hedgehog, black sets up their pawns on the 6th rank. So e6, d6. We've already got a pawn on b6. Pawn a6 would be coming too. And I'll develop with a scheme of knight f6, bishop e7, knight bd7, castle, and queen to c7. So, all right, they play knight f3. Now, if I play knight f6, attacking the e-pawn, they might play e5 in advance, and I'm not sure how I feel about that. So I think I should probably play d6 first. Yeah, let's just do this to ensure that if white does push the pawn, I can always take it. My opponent seems to have connection problems, so I really hope this game doesn't get interrupted because of that. Unlike ICC, you can actually see the chat here. So if my opponent says something wacky during the game, you'll know about it. Also, you can see this is a nice little feature. I like this. It shows the move time. And it shows it real time, so during the game, you can actually go and see how much time your opponent and also you spent on a particular move. So after I played b6 on move 1, my opponent thought for almost a minute there. And they do break with d4, so let's take this pawn. And on knight takes d4, I'll play knight f6, attacking the e4 pawn. And we are headed for a hedgehog. A very rich system, the hedgehog. I say system, it's not exactly an opening in that you can play it with either color. In fact, one of the most famous hedgehog games is Fischer versus Anderson from the Saigon Olympiad, I think, 1970, where Fischer played the white side of a hedgehog position in brilliant fashion. And he introduced this plan of attacking down the G file. Great game if you want to check that out. I would expect white to play f3 here just to support the e4 pawn. And I'll probably play bishop e7. I could play a6, but I don't see a good reason to this early. So let's prefer a developing move. Almost certainly I will play a6 within the next few moves, but I've often talked about moves that are necessary and ones which are expendable. And I feel like for now, a6 is unnecessary. It's kind of an expendable move, whereas I know I have to play bishop e7 and get castled. So we'll just do that straight away. For white's part, they should play bishop e2, bishop e3, and castle short. That's what's on the agenda for white coming up. Again, no reason to commit to anything on the queen side quite yet, so let's play this. And I hope this game will give me a good chance to elaborate on some hedgehog ideas. Queen d2. Now I think I probably will play a6, just to preface knight bd7. I wonder if it's possible to play without that move and somehow attack c4 quickly, like knight bd7, rook c8, knight e5, something along those lines. I could also consider playing a quick d5, although black usually does not do that in this line. d5 that early. If knight bd7, I just wonder if knight b5 is a bother. Yeah, I don't want to spend the time thinking about it, so I'll play this, which conforms to my setup anyways. I'm playing this game a little bit later in the day. It's about 10:30 at night on a Monday. I've said before, though, I do some of my best thinking at night, so I don't mind playing a bit later. I tend to work late, so my brain is active at this time of night anyways. He's being a little slow for some standard moves. I mean, nothing white has done so far is out of the ordinary. For now, I would just play bishop e2 without thinking twice about it. It's too early for white to initiate something in the center or on the queen side. They really just need to get castled. I mean, they could think about castling queenside. I've seen that before, and then try to launch a pawn storm in the style of an English attack, let's say. But I don't know that most players are willing to risk that. And if white went for this setup, probably they played a hedgehog before, and I don't know many hedgehog players who get in the habit of castling queenside. You almost always see just castling short. So bishop e2, let's go ahead and put the knight on d7. The knight is better placed here than c6 usually, because you, in many cases, want to direct the knight into e5 or sometimes c5. On c6, you could try to trade it for the knight on d4, but I feel like there's not as many options, although technically you could go to e5 through c6. You also want to leave the c file clear, so being able to play like queen c7 and rook c8 is kind of nice. I wish I could give you a more pinpoint, precise reason why d7 is preferred over c6, but one thing that may be relevant is if you have a knight on c6 and white puts a rook on c1, there are knight d5 issues, even with a pawn on e6. So imagine white plays rook c1 here, which there's a pretty good chance they will. If my knight were standing on c6, knight d5 becomes a bigger issue, because if e takes d5, c takes d5, suddenly there's a pin. So there is a defensive reason for preferring the knight here as well. So next I'm looking to play rook ac8, most likely. And a lot of times this kingside rook comes to the e8 square, rather than d8. Like, you might think it comes to d8, but no. In the hedgehog, often c8 and e8 are the best squares. c8 is, in particular, is helpful because obviously we're attacking down the c file here. But on e8, should black ever be able to enforce the d5 pawn break and some exchanges occur in the center, it could become readily available down the e file, this black rook on e8. It could become able to enter the game quite quickly if this bishop moves. So even though it'll be kind of lurking there on e8, don't count that piece out. Okay, white goes b4. Makes a lot of sense. I'll probably play queen b8 now. This is a typical maneuver as well. You tuck the queen away. And in playing this, I enabled this plan of bishop d8 to c7, the so-called Samish maneuver. The hedgehog is a really fun opening to study. I've mentioned it in a couple previous videos, especially standard. And there's a great two-part book series by Grandmaster Sergei Shipov, who is one of the best chess authors and really just chess commentators in general. The guy is amazing with what he does. But the hedgehog is an opening that's near and dear to him. And he really poured his heart and soul into these two books on the Hedgehog. So if you're interested in this opening, I would check those out. The way he talks about the plans and the deep understanding he displays is truly something to see. So white plays rook c2, probably preparing rook c1 or maybe rook b1. Often white will advance on the queen side in this opening. This doesn't hinder my plan of going bishop d8. And you might be wondering why play bishop d8. Well, the reason is to get the bishop to c7 and then play d5 at some stage to try to open up the attack on h2. Just trying to think here if it's worth throwing in knight e5 to attack the c4 pawn. Probably it's not, but it's on my radar. Yeah, I'm not going to mess around with knight e5. I also want to keep this diagonal somewhat clear if h2 does become a target. So we're going to go ahead with the Samish maneuver. Named after Fritz Samish, of course, who played a very early game featuring this maneuver. It was way ahead of its time, which Shipov talks about in the first part of that book series. I think the books are called The Complete Hedgehog, Volumes 1 and 2. I believe that's the name. And he dives heavily into the history of the Hedgehog. So once I put the bishop here, it wouldn't be unusual for white to play something like g3 or h3, just as a hedge against d5. I may have to be cautious if white doubles up on the c file. I mean, I don't want to play d5 and risk a potential disaster on c7 or c8, but I think I'll be in a scenario where I can conceivably play d5 in the future and not run afoul of some sort of tactic. And I have a time advantage. 14 minutes to my opponent's 9:30. I'd like to see that. Speaking as someone who's almost perpetually in time pressure in these 15-minute games. That 10-second increment makes a big difference. Even a smaller increment like 2 seconds would make a big difference. Because when you get down to, say, 5 minutes, that's not license for one side to just start playing off of the opponent's lack of time. You still have to play good chess moves because a good player can do a lot with 10 seconds on their clock. And you always have that built-in 10 seconds. And you can, if you get into some positions where you can fire off some quick moves, you can even build it up and start thinking more. This particularly happens in over-the-board games where there's, let's say, a time control of game and 90 minutes per side with 30-second increment per move. With 30-second increment, you can really, if you're in a position to do so, play some quick, safe moves that don't change the nature of the position and try to bank time to think about something more substantial for later. So here, white is reacting to my presence on this long diagonal by playing h3. Now I'm thinking about playing rook fe8, just so that d5 will come with more force in the future. I probably don't want to play it right now. I think if I position my rook down the e file, so I'm gazing at this bishop on e3, that will help me when I play this pawn break. And speaking of pawn breaks, I just put out a video today, which many of you have probably seen by now, or at least seen it on my channel, on pawn play. So Chess Fundamentals, number 4. It's all about pawn play. And I talk at length about pawn breaks, how to set them up, what types of positions warrant a pawn break, and the effects of these breaks when they do happen. In the Hedgehog, black's position has often been compared to a coiled spring. I think Shipov alludes to this. But basically, it has all this potential energy that could be released. You're sitting back on these last 3 ranks, 6th, 7th, and 8th ranks, and you're ceding the opponent all this space. But you're hoping to make a well-timed pawn break or two, and it's surprising how often in the Hedgehog, black's position just jumps to life. Maybe we'll even get to see that if I play this game well. But there are so many Hedgehog examples where like black will time the pawn break correctly, and the position will open up and white's space advantage becomes meaningless. And often the space that white has seized just turns into weak squares. That's the disadvantage of grabbing space, is that a lot of times you yield weak squares in the wake of this space. I'm not quite sure what my opponent should do here. I feel like their play has stalled somewhat. I mean, they might want to play the knight away to, say, b3, so at least they have their queen and their rook looking at the d5 square as well. It's hard to say, and that's kind of a restriction game. Earlier I mentioned that often white will play on the queen side, but here it doesn't seem so feasible. Like playing something like a4, a5 is misplaced. They've already committed a lot of their resource to the center rather than the queen side. Okay, now white plays rook dc1. This looks like a change of plans by them. So they also have another major piece on this diagonal. So if I were to play d5 now, and say the game goes like c takes d5, e takes d5, let's say knight takes d5, then, I mean, I can trade a couple times and then maybe sack on e3 at the end of this line. But I'm not sure I'm getting much more than my material back after like an eventual bishop f4. So big decision for me right now. Do I go for d5 directly, or do I try to wait and make it even stronger somehow? I mean, I can think of other moves I can play in the meantime, like moves like knight e5. But timing is everything in this opening, and if I sense the time is right to do this, I'm not going to hesitate. So if d5, c takes d5, e takes d5, let's say knight takes d5, and then I could take either way, actually. One thing I dislike, though, is that at the end of this line, my a6 pawn is kind of weak. So white's bishop on e2 could be attacking it. So I'm not quite sure about that. I could play queen a8 and defend a6 and better prepare for d5. If I play queen a8, I feel like there's no guessing about what my intention is, though. I'd like to leave some air of mystery in the position if I could. If I'm not taking the bull by the horns and playing d5 directly. So if d5, c takes d5, e takes d5, knight takes d5, let's just say knight takes d5, pawn takes d5, rook takes e3, queen takes, bishop f4. Yeah, I don't think it's enough. I don't think it's enough to justify d5 this soon. I could look into other plans, or I could just play this queen a8 move. Man, I don't see anything wrong with queen a8. It's going to support the d5 advance. Maybe one potential thing wrong is that my bishop on c7 is lacking a defender then. I could play knight e5. It doesn't contain a threat, but maybe transferring the knight to the king side is helpful later on. It goads white's f-pawn forward, too. I'm torn here because I feel like white has played suboptimally, especially with these last couple moves, or the 16th move and the 18th move. But then again, I mean, have they done that much damage to their position? It doesn't seem like they've done enough that it's like going to be fatal for them or something. And d5 is, well, tempting, just not looking like the right way to go here. I'm leaning towards knight e5. Yeah, I think I'm going to play it. So knight e5, and if f4, I'll play knight g6. I feel like it's perfectly acceptable for me to wait as well. Hedgehog players are used to laying low and trying to improve their position, waiting for a time to strike, so nothing unusual here. I also just challenge white to find a plan. It's hard to sit there and do nothing. Maybe white will come up with something forcing here, but they haven't shown much initiative yet. And time is becoming a factor for white. So they're down to 6 minutes. What does that do? Oh, it just shows the time control. Okay. There's all these chess.com v3 features I'm not sure about. So knight a4, okay. Yeah, reasonable move. Eyeing b6. b5 is another pawn break that black often looks to achieve, although here I wouldn't consider it because white has 3 pieces pointed at the b5 square. So it's probably not going to be correct. Once again, I could think about playing d5. So d5, let's say e takes d5 this time. E takes d5. If e takes d5, I have knight takes d5, and I enjoy tremendous activity there. But I think the critical line of d5 would be e takes d5, and then c5 if white pushes past. And that I'm not sure how that will turn out. I could play b5 there. Maybe they continue with c6, bishop a6, knight c5. Attacking my a6 pawn. Again, not quite sure. Something about that seems off. So d5, e takes d5, e takes d5, c5. Knight c4 would be nice there, but they have a bishop covering that square. So probably b5, but yeah, c6. c6, bishop a8, knight c5. There's a lot going on in that position, but somehow I don't like the fact that I end up with an isolated d-pawn there. What else could I think about playing here? I could play queen a8 maybe. But what's the point this time around? Hard to say. I feel like white might be gearing up for c5 themselves, but under the present circumstances, I don't think that would be a smart decision if they were to play that way. They might move this knight back and attack my b6 pawn. I'm kind of thinking about playing rook cd8 and just acknowledging that white is the one who's going to control matters down the c-file. But the thing about rook cd8 is that I probably have to kiss any chance of playing d5 goodbye. That may never happen. Maybe queen a8 is not so bad. Queen a8 and line up against e4. I mean, maybe someday I can take on e4 and then play bishop takes and go after this rook even. So if queen a8, how am I reacting to c5? That's a key question. Because then I feel like my queen is in a slightly awkward position to deal with c5. Bit of a conundrum here. I think my position's still fine, but this can happen in these hedgehog positions. Like, both sides are kind of feeling each other out, and it may not be immediately clear how you should proceed. Again, d5 is the most direct, but d5, e takes d5, e takes d5, c5. This is the third time I've looked at this line, but you know how when you get locked into a line and you try to make it work? That's what I'm experiencing right here. What if I play knight c4 then? Bishop takes c4, pawn takes c4. If rook takes c4, I have b5. So probably they'd have to play knight takes b6 or pawn takes b6 instead. There's a lot of interesting stuff happening there. You know what? Maybe this attack down the diagonal is stronger than I thought, because I do have knight h5 and into g3 at some stage. So let's say I play d5 here. E takes d5, e takes d5. C takes d5 I'm not so afraid of because of knight takes, and I think my activity is going to be pretty tough to meet there. So after d5, e takes d5, e takes d5, c5, b5, or I think instead of b5 I was looking at knight c4. Bishop takes c4, d takes c4, And then let's say they take on b6. Let's just say with the c-pawn. I can go bishop h2 check, king h1, and maybe knight h5 at the very end of that line. There's some hazy stuff going there. I mean, they might be able to play f4. It's really tough to say. Okay, I'm going to take a bit of a risk and play d5. I think this is going to complicate the game. I don't think white will be able to respond in straightforward fashion unless they've already thought about what will happen here. Maybe I should have played this on the previous move. We'll take a look at that in the analysis. It's tough to say. So in a couple of these lines I just mentioned, I'm sacrificing a pawn and playing for an attack. I somehow forgot about the knight h5 idea. Because if I can get my bishop to h2 with check and force white to play king h1, knight h5 and into g3 could be a strong attacking motif. But to be honest, there's so much stuff to calculate here. It's really hard to say definitively whether that will matter or not. You can see my move times. I've really slowed down these past few moves, as expected. Okay, white does take, so now big moment of truth. Will they play c5 or will they do something else? They do play c5, okay. So I think here if I play b5, probably they're playing c6. That was what I thought they would do at least. Maybe that's not even so bad. b5, c6, b takes a4, c takes b7, queen takes b7. Is that so terrible for me? I'm actually up a pawn there. My structure is pretty ragged, though. I think knight c4 is what I'd like to do. So knight c4, bishop takes c4, d takes c4. And then if rook takes, there's b5. We know that. So probably they're going to be taking on b6. And I don't know if with knight or bishop. It's hard to say. But I'm thinking this bishop h2 check and then knight h5 plan. Taking is out of the question. They're going to play knight takes c5 if we do that. I think the critical line, if knight c4, is probably bishop takes c4, d takes c4, knight takes b6, the more that I think about it. And then let's say I play rook c d8. I've got a lot of heat coming down on d4 and e3. Okay, let's give it a shot. We're rolling the dice a little bit, but we'll see how this pans out. Some time pressure approaching for both sides. He takes right away. Okay, so we recapture. I'm not going to throw in bishop h2 yet. I don't have to. Aside from that one little hiccup, like rook d1 and then rook dc1, otherwise white's been playing very confidently. Doesn't look like they're really caring too much about my plans. Rightly or wrongly, I guess we'll find out. Okay, so here I was thinking check. And then after king h1, I'll have a choice between knight h5 or knight d5. So let's definitely start with the check and see which way white goes. I think both moves look kind of dangerous to white, to be honest. Like knight d5 attacks e3, so that's particularly attractive. But knight h5 threatens knight g3 check, king takes h2, knight f1, which would win everything. So I'm also going to be very tempted by that move. This is sort of the craziness that can transpire when the position opens up in a hedgehog. It goes from like maneuvering, preparation for both white and black, to pawn break, explosion of play. The tempo can change that fast. Here white is stopping to think. I mean, king f2 is kind of out of the question. They don't want to leave g3 weak. I would assume. I mean, it would be kind of weird for them to do that. So king h1 or king f1 are definitely the main moves. Now, I guess they can utilize the f5 square for their knight. That's maybe one thing I should consider here. So, like, if I play knight h5, I think knight f5 could be a good reply. Here I can also take on e3 and then play bishop f4 and skewer them, but that would probably just win my material back. And I'm playing for more. I want a full-fledged attack here, not just a scenario where I get my material back. So I think I'm going to play knight d5. I'm liking this a little bit more. If bishop g5, probably h6 or maybe f6, actually. Just to discourage them from sacrificing. I got to play off my initiative here. I've already invested a pawn. The queen side is not looking good for me. So I need to keep the threats going. I need to keep white defending. Try to make life difficult for them. If rook e1... Okay, this move allows bishop f4. So I'm happy to see that at least. Maybe white can fade my attack after that, but I at least know that I can get my exchange back, and I think I will play this. Hit the queen. Could be tough even after winning the exchange, because I'm particularly worried about knight c5, and no telling if c4 is going to survive. Maybe I should hold off on taking the exchange. My dark square bishop is pretty strong, isn't it? Like, what if I play rook cd8 here and just line up against their queen? I played crazier moves. But probably I'll play bishop takes c1. I'm just kind of throwing out possibilities here. So if takes, let's say queen takes, then how do I stop them from just winning c4? Maybe I can't. Maybe I'm unable to prevent that. I could play knight e3 here. Knight e3, bishop takes e3 would be, I think, pretty much forced. Bishop takes, then I win that dark square bishop. That's a pretty valuable asset to white, isn't it? Rook takes c4, bishop takes c1. Queen takes c1. They have back rank problems, though. Then I have rook takes c4, queen takes c4, rook e1, which will lead to mate. Wow, could I really play this move? I think I can get away with it. Let's try it. We're going to be putting a premium on the initiative with this move once again, but I think this dark square bishop is a prized possession for white. I don't think they want to part with it so quickly. And my queen opens up towards h2. That rook on c1 is kind of pathetic anyways. So yeah, maybe we can play this way. So let's take that, baby. So I'm thinking if rook takes c4, bishop takes c1, queen takes c1, rook takes c4, queen takes c4, I've got rook e1 check at the end of that line. And my queen controls h2. So they'd have to play queen f1, and then I mate them. That's kind of an optimistic line, but that just shows what would happen if white grabbed here. I mean, they could play rook takes c4, bishop takes c1, rook takes c1, but I think they'll still experience back rank issues. Maybe like rook cd8 instead. Pin the knight on d4. Okay, so this might happen. We'll see. Anything else I could play here? Like bishop takes d4? Nah. We're going to go for this. Let's hope he takes with the queen. A little bit of hope chess here. I mean, I think rook takes c1 is still going to be good for us, but I would prefer to see queen takes. Let's just put it that way. 3 minutes for white, 2:44 for me. I think you might see the tactic, so I predict rook takes c1 will be played. If rook takes c8 is played here, I can just recapture with my queen, and I'll be defending the bishop. Yeah, they found the best move. Okay, but here I can play rook c to d8 and attack this knight. The only thing is this knight's going to get in play. It's going to get to c5, which is annoying. Maybe I can just trade and then play queen g3. What about that? Then I'm attacking e1. I'm threatening rook e1. And maybe even a bishop takes f3 type move coming up. If that's possible, that's the most direct. So rook takes c1, queen takes c1, queen g3. We know the threat. And how do they defend e1? They'd have to play knight c2, bishop takes f3. Take, I have rook e2 coming. Ooh, that's crushing. I could play queen g3 right away, but I think this move order is better. Yeah, it's much more forceful. Okay, well, let's take here. He's going to take back real quick and get that 10 seconds added, so white's going to have a little over 3 minutes. All right, so queen g3. My back rank is nicely covered. I could always get the rook over to c8. Looks good. Let's dive in. And if knight c2, bishop takes f3, might just be fatal for white. That's going to be really tough to come back from that. If they take, my rook joins the attack on e2, and there's too many mate threats. Knight c2 is a really ugly move to have to play here. What else can white do, though? Moving the queen isn't going to help. This knight can't help. It's too far away. Yeah, I think that's going to be about forced. After knight c2, I have rook e2 as well, although then they could play knight e3. So probably better to play bishop takes f3. That's got to be the cleaner move order. Yeah, leave the rook on e8 for now. White's not going to be immediately losing after bishop takes f3, but they're going to have to move their queen over to like f1 or g1, probably f1. And then I could even play bishop e4, attack this knight, also set up queen takes h3. They're losing a lot of pawns around their king. I think as long as I keep this b6 pawn in my sights, white's going to be busted. White's agonizing over this one, but I don't blame them because, I mean, I'm sure they've spotted knight c2 by now. It's just not a move you want to have to play. It's like a desperation move. Yeah, and they play it. So bishop takes f3. Incoming. Inviting all the pieces to the party. Get everyone involved in the attack. So I think probably queen f1 will be played. And I can take on h3 then, but they have king h1, and then suddenly my queen and my bishop are under attack. I bet that's probably still good if I could play a move like queen h5. But probably if queen f1, I'll just play some sort of bishop move. Like I was thinking bishop e4 is pretty straightforward. Attacking the knight. Still threatening queen takes h3. White's going to take it, but yeah, rook e2 is what I thought was terminal here. Just checking to see if I should snatch one of these pawns first. I can take a pawn with check, but I don't even see a reason to. I think rook e2 directly is going to be game over. Because I'm threatening queen g2 mate and queen h2 mate, and I still keep the threats on these two pawns. White doesn't have any checks. And whichever queen move they play, queen f1 or queen g1, I have something. Like if queen g1 trying to cover both the squares, queen takes h3 or queen takes f3 is going to be mate next move. Yeah, knight move doesn't help either. So I think this is lights out. White is down to their last 30 seconds as well. If that b pawn was one square closer, that could make a difference. They could promote and distract my queen. But white resigns. Boy, that was a really fun game. Yeah, I really enjoyed that one. I almost don't want to look at it with a computer so I can savor this moment. But this is a prime example of why the Hedgehog is a great opening to play and study, and why knowing the plans for both sides can be so much fun, just studying this opening in general. So let's go back and take a look. Things clearly heated up when I played d5 on move 19. And yeah, I'll just briefly run through the moves prior to that. Interesting how this move order came about. So white playing in English, and I responded with b6. And then put the bishop on b7. The principled way to play here as white would be to take the center. So play e4. Try to grab space in the middle. But... oh, and white did play e4. But after this, they decided to throw caution to the wind a little bit and make sure that bishop b4 could not come to attack the knight on c3, which is defending the pawn on e4. So, understandable that white would do this. And then I played c5, so I have some influence over the d4 square. And we proceeded into this Hedgehog setup. Here I was talking about how I didn't feel the need to play a6 quite yet. Knight b5 is not a problem. Knight b5 would attack the pawn on d6 twice, but I have it defended twice. So I could always meet knight b5 with a6 and just back the white knight off. No big deal. So I castled, white played queen d2. All these moves are standard. This is, in fact, still Hedgehog theory. My rook went to c8. So black's pieces fit together very nicely in the Hedgehog. As you can see, like, no piece is really stepping on another's toes. Had I put the knight on c6, by the way, so let's just say I played this here. There's some tension between the knights, but let's continue hypothetically. Say castles is played, say I put my queen here. So one downside is that knight d5 could become a sacrificial theme for white. Can't even really call it a sacrifice here, actually. It's just a good move. Because if I take with my pawn, they take with the c-pawn, and suddenly I have issues related to this pin knight. And the rook on c1, bearing down on my queen. So that's just one example of how knight bd7 could be preferable to knight c6. So here white played b4, and I went for this Samish maneuver with queen b8, intending bishop d8 to c7. So white played rook c2. If you were to database this position, if you were to look this up in a chess database, you would find a lot of games. Most of the games I've seen, white goes knight b3, and then plays to either pressure d6 or try to go a4, a5. So that's what I would recommend here for white. The positions can get kind of tangled, but this is, I think, how white should play. The plan white adopted in the game just didn't amount to anything. I mean, they played rook c2, and then after bishop d8, rook d1, but quickly switched the rook over to the c file anyways here on move 18. So, yeah, I think back here, it would have been better for white to play knight b3, voluntarily withdraw the knight from the center in hopes of either attacking d6 or propping up a4, a5. The knight on b3 does a good job of supporting the a5 pawn push. So this happened. I've got my bishop onto a more aggressive diagonal. And white played h3. I played an improving move, rook fe8, so my rook is operating down this file in preparation for d5. So rook dc1. Yeah, now knight e5. So this is a moment right here after rook dc1 where, in retrospect, I was wondering if d5 right now was better. I spent some time here, and I wonder if I could have played this move straight away. So let's say c takes d5 is played against that. E takes d5, knight takes d5. This is the line I was trying to figure out. Let's say knight takes, pawn takes. Now, I could just recover the pawn, but a6 is loose here. Bishop takes a6 might be possible. I could also play check and then say, but you know what? Yeah, I don't have my knight on f6 anymore. If black were playing knight takes d5 in response to white's knight takes d5, then that wouldn't work. So maybe I got to take with the bishop. Makes me nervous parting with that light square bishop, though, because like c6, for instance, becomes a lot weaker. So let's just say I did a plan like this. I mean, it looks kind of crazy. Yeah, there's probably a direct refutation. First I was thinking this move, but check, take, double check, king here. Yeah, black's queen is hanging. So is white's, but I think white's just winning here. Yeah, queen h2, take. This is not working for black. Black has sacrificed all their pieces, but to no end. So maybe my decision to postpone d5 was acceptable. But this was the first moment in the game where I felt like all the groundwork had been laid for this pawn break. So I really, really wanted to play it. As I said, b5 is another pawn break that black often looks to. But here, I don't think it's playable. White's got too many pieces on that square. Sometimes black will play b5, and then after white takes, then go d5. Judging that there's no pawn on c4, so there's less of a reason to fear this break. But I think with a6 being under attack, I don't think allowing white to knock out our pawns like dominoes is a good idea. So let me go back to that moment here where I played knight e5. I'm not completely happy about knight e5. I think there's probably a better move here. I'm just not sure what it is. If d5 is not working, I have to go into maneuvering play and I have to bide my time. In that Fischer game I mentioned, Fischer did a plan involving king h8, rook g8. He did it as white, actually, so it was like moving the king and playing rook g1. And then eventually going for g5. I think with white's queen and bishop here, though, that might be difficult to achieve. And it's kind of a long plan. A lot of times that plan isn't working. So knight e5 here. Yeah, now I decided to go d5, and I spent a good deal of time on that move. You can see my clock down here. I spent about half my remaining time deciding whether to play d5. It's almost like a now or never moment in my eyes. Because the alternatives weren't looking too hot. I mean, I was considering stuff like queen a8 or knight fd7, trying to support squares like c5 and b6, but if you're black, you feel like you've made all these preparations and you want to get on with the thing and play d5. And it worked out really well in the game, but as you can see, it was kind of touch and go. Like, I didn't have everything planned out from here. It's too complicated of a position. So e takes d5, e takes d5, c5. I thought this was the critical line, because if white takes here, then I get to play knight takes d5. I don't have any structural problems, and I'm attacking that bishop on e3. Inherently, if the position opens up, I think the stakes are a little higher for white's king compared to mine. They've already weakened themselves to some degree by playing h3 and f3. So they want something to show for that king weakness. Like here, at least they can claim that structurally they're a lot better. And here I went for knight c4. The other line I was heavily considering here was b5, attacking the knight. And I thought that if white had to retreat, well, maybe I get to go knight c4, take, and then take with the d pawn. And then I have two bishops on these great diagonals, especially the dark square bishop. Also, maybe rook cd8 can be played. It looks pretty good for black. But I think the move I didn't like was c6 in response to b5, counterattacking my light square bishop and just plowing ahead. And then if I had to retreat, bishop a8, white's going to jump in here, attacking the a6 pawn. I wasn't liking the look of this. I can still go knight c4, but I think with my bishop being so badly buried here, I'm skeptical of my chances to truly prove that my attack is sound. There's also the line b takes a4, c takes b7, queen takes b7. And I'm actually up a pawn here, as I mentioned, but I otherwise do not like my position. White's got pressure down the c-file. They've got two bishops. I don't have a queen-bishop battery anymore. So you can see in this game, there were several points where I made decisions almost opposite to what the material situation said. Like, right there, I could have just gone down a line where maybe I win a pawn, but I rejected it. Later, I could have won an exchange by taking on c1, and I also rejected that. Because when the play is sharp, like, material might not matter as much as the initiative. So hence knight c4, attacking the queen and the bishop. We've got a double attack there. White took with their bishop. Otherwise, they'd have to sack an exchange. So I took back, and now c takes b6. White didn't spend too long on this move, as you can see from their time. Yeah, not long at all. But I really think knight takes b6 was critical as well. Considering that this knight never got in the game, it never moved from a4 after move 19. Maybe this was their chance to activate this piece and also take another pawn and look at the c4 pawn as well. I would never play bishop takes b6 here because then I have no attack on the dark squares. So probably the game would have proceeded in similar fashion, like check here. But given that white is on my rook on c8, I feel like they're going to win a crucial tempo somewhere. And maybe my attack is unsound. I mean, I could think about playing knight d5 here, but I'm allowing knight takes c8. Knight h5, I think, is always met by knight f5. I'm not sure about that. Something tells me that that isn't working for black. It's really tough to say here. You notice I haven't added in the engine. Chess.com's format is a little bit different. I think to get the engine analysis, I'd actually have to click this button, which I might do at the end. But I kind of like this too, because I like mixing up my analysis and doing without an engine as well. That's an important part of the improvement process. Being willing to analyze a game, even a complicated game, without the assistance of an engine. So my judgment is that white should have at least thought about knight takes b6, especially in view of what happened. So going back to where that capture on b6 was played. So c takes b6. I gave a check on h2. White could play king f1 here, but I think still knight d5 is going to be strong. I'm not sure their king is any safer on h1 than it is on f1. I mean f1 than it is on h1. h1 would be the natural move. If I could just rearrange my queen and my dark square bishop, I'd be checkmating white right now. But that's hard to pull off. So here, I felt like I had to get my knight involved and attack this bishop on e3. There's just a lot of moves to consider here. I mean, even moves like bishop g5 are possible right now. Trying to evade the attack from the knight, but still maintain control of this diagonal. I think I mentioned f6 against this move I was thinking about. Trying to force the bishop here so I can still go bishop f4. Might be some other options for white, like I think rook e1 was another move I talked about. Trying to get a major piece off this diagonal and also defend this point, the e3 point. Even though white wouldn't be happy with their dark square weaknesses and also fighting against the two bishops, this bishop is pretty bad. I mean, as long as this pawn stays here and I can't sacrifice, this bishop is just waiting for the executioner when knight c5 comes. So, I mean, if white can defend against my initiative here and not get back rank checkmated or lose a lot of material, they're in good shape. So knight d5, bishop f2, and then I got in bishop f4. So after queen d1, another key decision. This took me over a minute. Basically, about a minute to make this move, knight e3, because it's tempting just to snap off the rook on c1 and say, well, why shouldn't we? We're down material. We've already sacrificed some material to get to this position. But this goes back to what I was saying about placing a premium on the initiative versus just always looking at the material count. Because if you always look at the material count, you might miss opportunities like this where maybe there's even some better way to prosecute your advantage. Often when you're attacking, you face this decision. And the decision is either keep attacking, keep investing material or time to keep that fire burning and play for checkmate or play for greater material, or cash in and just take the material that your opponent's giving you and say, I'm satisfied with that. And here I just didn't think that bishop takes c1 was the move, mainly because of the dark square weaknesses around white's king. And I think this bishop is a particularly good defender. So by playing knight e3, I can ensure that white will take it at least. Possibly white should not take it, now that I think about it. Maybe they should go queen g1 and try to play this position. But here, at least, I feel like this is an improvement because I've kept my dark square bishop compared to that other line where I had to surrender it. It's still pretty unclear, like I said, because this knight, if it jumps to c5, that's going to be a game changer. Maybe I can somehow prevent that or distract white, but Nothing immediate is jumping to the mind here. Complicated position. Humans are just limited by our carbon-based forms here and our limited brains. Like an engine would, if I add the engine, it's going to basically tell us the truth about this position. But as a human, I feel like in this type of position, I have a flashlight in a dark forest, and I'm a decent player, so my flashlight is pretty strong. But the beam of light can only penetrate so far into the forest. And I'm just making my best guess about where to go. I kind of know the path to take, but I don't have all the answers. So that's why even for me as a pretty strong player, it's hard to come to a strict determination here. If I were to analyze this on my own, I would need a few hours at least for a game of this complexity to really reach like a conclusion I felt comfortable with. And even then, as soon as I click on the computer, it's going to tell me something, if not different, something new that I hadn't considered. So let me go back to this moment. So after we played knight e3, I was very happy when white took, because now I felt like my attack was getting off the ground. And I knew that white would have perpetual problems on the dark squares, everlasting problems on that color complex. If white moved the rook away here, so say rook b1, I was going to play rook cd1, or actually probably rook e d8. So let's say like this. Keep this pawn defended by my rook and attack the knight, which is pinned. So that should win material. So hence, white took on c4, but then I took on c1, and now rook takes c1 is forced, because if queen takes c1, there's this tactical idea where I have rook e1 check at the end, and I have just enough juice in the tank to administer checkmate and win the game. So that was nice that was working out. And I think I'm just winning here after rook takes c4. This is probably the game-losing blunder for white, because I don't see any other move that doesn't just result in them being down a rook. Because they played this, but this line is also forcing. Take, queen g3, threaten rook e1. And white sunk, because the only way to cover that e1 square is with knight c2, and you saw what happened after that. Bishop takes f3. And then white played g takes f3, and after rook e2, it's over because of all these threats. But had they played, let's say, queen f1, I think I was just going to play bishop e4, attack this knight. Let's say knight d4, queen takes h3. This pawn is pinned, so they have to play this. Probably there's several good moves here. Probably even bishop takes g2 is working. If queen takes g2, I have rook e1 check, king here, and then queen e3 checkmate. That's a tidy little mate. So my threats have reached critical mass. There's no way white's going to defend at this stage, especially with this knight that's just a spectator on the side of the board. So very enjoyable game. I mean, I wish I could play games like this all the time. The problem is if you play in this style, like you're going to have up and down results. But these are the type of games that remind you how rich and beautiful chess is. So it was a lot of fun. Even if I had lost this game, I would still think it would be fun. Objectively, I think one of the critical moments is right here. Basically when I embark on this d5 idea and I get my knight into c4. I think white should have slowed down a little bit with this next move. The c takes b6 was played quickly, and I think knight takes b6 is better. If you can recognize that the play is critical here, starting with, I would say, d5, then that's good. That shows you're adjusting your thought process to the position. And by saying that the play is critical, I mean that every decision for both white and black from this point forward could mean a changed result or something big happening in the result of the game. Because the play is sharp, there's tactics every move, there's stuff to calculate constantly. I'm going to click this button just to see what it does. Oh, there we go. Okay, I hope this doesn't completely mess up my screen capture. If it does, I might just... a quick 2 minutes. Okay, I'm not going to make you guys stick around for this, but I'll maybe post this analysis, or maybe I'll put it into Lichess and post the link there, because I think it would be interesting to see what the engine has to say. So And I don't want to ruin this recording with adding the engine too. You never know. It might just say we played completely terrible. Hopefully not. All right. Hope you guys enjoyed this game. And let me know if you have any questions in the comments as usual. And hope you like the game on chess.com. We're going to just try some different sites here in the weeks to come. So thanks for watching, guys.